All right, we're ready to go.
Good evening, everybody. This is the Oregon City Commission work session for January 19, 2022. Mr. Wiley, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Adam Marl.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
And Mayor Rachel Lousmith.
Here. All right, the first item and the only item on our agenda tonight for the work session is an update on the ARPA funding. Mr. Conkle.
Yep, thank you. Evening, commissioners and mayor. So tonight we have an update on the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, for 2021. And so I'll turn it over to Matt Duck to kind of give the background, and then we can have a discussion about the funds.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'll take this off. This is, believe it or not, the first time I've been in front of you in person since I've been here after a year, and it's good to be here. I'm going to share my screen if I can. So tonight we're here to talk about the American Rescue Plan Act, also known as ARPA, and this, as a brief overview, came into being back in March of 2021, and the timeline on your screen here gives some of the key dates. We first interacted with it in front of you in the adoption of the budget back in May of 2021 is when the federal government released their interim rules. They put those out as quickly as they could within 60 days and gave some guidance on how entities could use that. And then in June, we included it in our budget, and we did so at the tune of $7.6 million, which was the amount that we were anticipating at the time. And I think we were one of the few entities that actually did get that in front of the governing body that quickly, even though we had some questions. We put it into the budget at the high level, some high level categories, but I'm glad we did because we knew at the time that we were anticipating $7.6 million. So in the last 6 months, while everybody has been trying to figure out what to do with those funds, the federal government through the Treasury has finalized their rules on how those are spent. And I know you've heard from City Manager Conkle that we were waiting on some of the questions to be answered before we came in front of you. And so actually on January 6th, perfect timing, they released their final rules. And the good news to that is that everything that we had anticipated previously became a lot more flexible in how we spent those funds. So I'm going to go into a little bit of overview on the different buckets that you can, the different categories you can spend those funds on. But the good news is that we'll be able to be a little bit more flexible with those. So the other two key remaining dates on this slide are December 31st, 2024, and that's the date by which we have to obligate the fund. And that essentially means enter into a contract. So I think of a construction contract. Those are usually multi-year contracts, right? So if we were to make an award for a contract, we just have to have that in front of you for approval by the 24th, 2024. And then we just have to wrap up that contract by 2026 or those contracts. So a long-term time frame. And so we are now in front of you to discuss tonight how we want to use those funds as a city. So I provide the next slide just as sort of a top to bottom scope of what the ARPA delivered. Is you've probably heard the number 1.9 trillion in the media. That included a lot of stimulus payments directly to individuals and families, and then a whole myriad of other buckets. But 350 billion was directed specifically to state, local, and tribal governments, and then further carved out of that was 65 billion towards local government. 4.2 of that went to Oregon. And then one of the key measurements of who gets what is cities over 50,000 population and cities under 50,000 population. Because Oregon City is under 50,000, we get our funds through the state. And that was allocated out on a formulation based on population. And so cities, larger cities, there's only 4 or 5, 6 in Oregon that got funds directly from the federal government, but the cities under 50,000 population, 243 million went to in whole to those cities. And Oregon City ended up with 8.3. So about another 700,000 beyond what we were originally told. So that's good news. This slide here just goes over the 4 primary categories of ARPA. The first category is public sector revenues, and that was the category in which the federal government responded to governments that were seeing less revenue from the beginning of the pandemic, yet that wasn't addressed by CARES. So things like tourism, things that people weren't traveling, so gas taxes go down, things like that. It took about a year to get the federal government to respond to address the needs of cities. We all received CARES funds. We were familiar with that, but that was going more towards employment issues and then direct stimulus to individual families. So the largest category is this public sector revenue. When we first learned about this, there was a complex formula for how to come up with the amount of revenue loss that each entity had. So back at budget time, we did a really high level estimate, and we anticipated about a 1.6 million, between 1.6 and 2 million in lost revenue. But that was without seeing any documentation as to how that was going to be calculated. So I'm going to touch on that here in a second because that's been updated. But that was the big wild card that we were primarily facing. Category 2, public health and economic response. That was to address the public health impact, both to workers and things like childcare, and also economic harms, helping businesses stay afloat and things like that. The third category is premium pay for essential workers, offering support for those that were on the front lines, whether that be public safety, in our case, public safety, public works, healthcare workers, et cetera. That was a category that they have explicit rules around. And then finally, the fourth one, which is probably the easiest category to fit into, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And if you recall, in a second here, I'll show you in the slide, we allocated about 5.6 million towards our water needs. We have you've recently heard about the deferred water needs that we have, and to the tune of about 82 million. So it was very easy to take the estimated loss of revenue, about 2 million, and then put the rest, a little bit into broadband, a little bit into tourism, and then the rest into water. That's what we put into the budget. Initially, that was just water and sewer, and one of the notable things that was excluded from that category was transportation. And so we were monitoring that to see whether or not transportation would be included in that. And this category still doesn't include transportation, but there are ways that entities can use money on transportation. So those are the 4 high-level categories, and probably the ones you would hear the most about amongst, say, the League of Oregon Cities and other colleagues. So as I indicated earlier, we originally estimated to receive 7.6, and we got that number early on through our representative or our senator, and we ended up getting 8.293 million. And so cash flow wise, I know we've had conversation earlier in 2021 about, hey, have we received that money yet? And we've received half, and we received that in July. So right now we've got those funds ready to go. And we've also, so cash flow wise, we're doing fine. We've begun to spend some of that, and I'll show you where we have in a second. But we anticipate getting the second half here, probably July of 2022. So that's the background of ARPA, and I wanted to just give you the high-level overview. The crux of tonight's conversation, what we wanted to get in front of you was, initially we were thinking, how do we spend the unallocated money that we had in the budget, which was the about 1.6 million. And we didn't allocate that at the time of the budget because we, again, didn't know how the revenue loss was going to be calculated. And we didn't know how flexible that was going to be able to be spent. Hopefully, I apologize for those of you in the audience that this is small text on the screens, but what we have in front of you is just kind of a timeline of the way the money has been handled over time. On the left of the slide here, you see a list of projects or proposed uses. And these were just ones that we thought would be a good starting point to have the conversation. The next column over, the original budget, that is how we put the estimated 7.6 million into our adopted budget, which we have right now, the 21-23 budget. In the third column over where it says final award, that reflects the actual monies that we've received. And the only difference between those two is that we have a little bit higher dollar amount in the undesignated row, which is the fifth row down. You'll see that it reflects the $2,093,000. In the column to the fourth column over under potential projects, that reflects the first four lines as we put into the budget, and then taking that undesignated category and a list of proposed uses, ones that we are aware of, and some really high level just allocated dollars. Not anything locked in stone. There's not any contracts associated with those, but just as we, as staff, internalized and put on paper. And then, that list, at the bottom of that list, it's a $10 million list, clearly is over and above what we have. So it was a kind of a brainstorming of ideas, and then knowing that we would have to parse that down, and knowing that also that list is not comprehensive. That's what we're bringing as a starting point for this evening. So the final column is the staff proposal if we were to stick within the 8.3 million that we have been awarded. And so there's some things that are funded and some things that aren't funded. So essentially, that's an overview of ARPA and what we wanted to start with, and then really just get from you some feedback about, in particular, the list on the bottom half of that list, the projects there, and I'll turn it over to Tony to add any commentary on that. So that's essentially the end of my presentation.
Can you maybe just give an update on the rulemaking related to under 10 million if awarded?
Good point. Thank you. On January 6th, 2022, when the federal government came out with their final rule, I'm going to go back to this slide here where it has these categories. The 6 months between their interim rule and the final rule was where the Treasury actually received a lot of comment from governments and associations all across the nation. Both people like the League of Oregon Cities, National League of Cities, were getting feedback from all the cities that were looking at the interim rule and getting feedback and saying, gee, Treasury, it'd be nice if this or that. One of the primary things that they came back with was saying, okay, across the board, the first 10 million of any award, you can consider it category 1, public sector revenue replacement, and you can use those towards government services. So essentially, if your award was greater than 10 million, say City of Hillsborough, 16 million, their first 10 million, they can use essentially how they see fit, deliver services that they would traditionally deliver. They would have to fit the remaining 6 million into another bucket unless they went through the formula, the original formula, and proved that they actually had a greater revenue loss than 10 million. The whole point was that the Treasury said, let's make this a standard allocation, and many small entities that don't have the capacity or the administrative overhead to deal with the federal award, they don't have to do the calculations, they don't have to go through the hoops. It's just a $10 million or up to $10 million public sector revenue replacement. So what that did for us here in Oregon City is essentially make our whole award eligible to use at our discretion and not fit into these other categories. Doesn't mean we can't, and we obviously budgeted with a majority of that towards water, broadband, but the rules have changed, and it's a good position to point.
So just to be clear, you're saying that because it was under 10 million, we could use our entire amount for that first category 1.
Right.
However, that first category 1 does have a stipulation that it is supposed to be equal to the amount of revenue lost. So are you saying we lost 8.6 million in revenue?
No, we did not. In fact, when we went through the original calculation of revenue, of how to calculate revenue according to the federal government, we were at about 3.6 to 4. Keep in mind that's their calculation of how we can what we consider revenue loss. I'm not saying that we lost 3.6 or 4 million. They had to take a major formula and apply it to the whole nation.
Sure.
And they did so in such a way that they looked back, comparing pre-COVID revenues with post. Everybody's going to have different factors there. So no, we didn't lose 8 million, but we can consider the entire award as revenue replacement. And basically what that means is we don't have to go through the other nuances of the other categories to say, is this a water project?
You can toss the formula out the window, essentially.
That's
and
right.
Say that.
That's right.
We're going to pretend as if we lost 10 million in revenue or 8.6 in revenue.
Right.
Okay.
And there's absolutely no need to demonstrate a loss of revenue.
No.
Yet that's what the opening statement says.
And that's what the definition of that category is a slide from the early definition of ARPA. So if that's confusing, I apologize. But no, that they really took that restriction off basically on January 6th, 2022.
I look at this major influx of cash, and I look at that list, which to me are just placeholders. And I don't feel that we immediately have to, let's spend all this because we've got it. Let's be fiscally responsible on this. Let's fall back on the wants versus needs thing before we go off on some allocation of funds that could be applied more efficiently with a higher payback elsewhere. That's my first reaction to this. Like, wow, we just got $8 million. Let's stop. Think this through. I look at this list that you provided, this ARPA budget and proposed uses. Some of these things, did they not already exist on our city budget? They look very familiar, as in the Cayuse 5 tribute. Was that not? Those monies were already allocated. So when I look under the column of staff proposal, were those already allocated to things under our existing city budget?
No, the Cayuse 5, we're worried that 200,000 allocated for that might not be sufficient. So I guess just to be clear, we're not asking, if the commission wants to take 6 months to get through this, that's fine. We're not asking for a specific decision tonight. We're just trying to start the conversation about what do we do with these funds as we move forward, knowing that there are deadlines eventually at some point that you need to allocate project. So when we put this together, we've heard a lot of discussion about a bathroom downtown that was not funded. We've heard about relocating Father's Heart. There were no funds allocated for that. Community meeting spaces. We've heard a desire for additional spaces in city facilities for neighborhood meetings, community meeting spaces. Places like community development, City Hall. There are certain improvements that would need to be made to those facilities in order for them to be utilized by the public at night in terms of securing the building. Clackment Park boat ramp. This one has been there for a while in terms of once we get through the Clackment Park master planning process. Part of that we would imagine would be the discussion about what do we do with the boat ramp in Clackment Park. Any grant that we would receive from the state does have a local match component to that. The Cayuse 5 tribute, once again, we allocated 200,000. We don't know exactly what that's going to end up being. Ongoing COVID mitigation for city operations. So, we still have filter replacements, materials that we're buying related to having staff in all of our facilities as well as the general public. Hold for unanticipated future opportunities. It was just a placeholder at that point. We had talked during the budget process about pedestrian improvements throughout the community, whether that be activated crosswalks or sidewalk infill. Some costs associated with the library that they're incurring, trying to keep that facility open with COVID in place. Small business growth and retention program, that was one of the buckets identified originally through ARPA. So, if there's additional programs that we want to put together, like we did with the CARES funding, we did those 2 rounds of grants to businesses. We've talked considerably about the quiet zone. That's still not approved at the federal level, but we know that we'll have a match on those federal dollars. Facilities deferred maintenance. We've talked quite a bit about that. We've seen some work on that from parks. We know that we have deferred maintenance in our facilities. Cove water quality, we're working with Restore Cap. There was no funding identified with that within the urban renewal plan, nor through the city budget. So these were really ideas that we had heard brought up, whether through the goal setting process or just in conversations of ideas that community members have brought or the commission had discussed. And we were just trying to get those down onto paper with rough estimates of what those numbers would look like for this exercise to go through and think about how do we want to spend these funds. And I'm sure there's probably things that we missed on this list.
Well, we're throwing around a lot of big numbers. I mean, the staff proposals from downtown bathroom down to unanticipated future opportunity, there's $2 million there. And then under potential projects without a staff proposal, there's another $2 million. So I don't mind utilizing these as placeholders with no commitment to spend the money as defined here. I mean, the Clackment boat ramp has been an ongoing discussion with the state as to liability and what we need, what our role is in it and what their expectations are. I mean, I see.
Or if we even need one.
Very good comment. I don't mind it as an opening, and I don't view it as excluding other possibilities or limiting to these. I just view it as an opening discussion as to potential uses of these dollars. And we're throwing some big chunks of change around there that I think need discussion because we don't know what may arise in the future. I certainly don't have any problem with ongoing COVID mitigation for city operations. That's going to be an expense we're going to incur. And that number might even be light, but some of these numbers and these categories, they're going to need specific discussions because there's going to be competing uses. Dollars are never unlimited, and demand for dollars are never unlimited. Dollars are limited. That's my thoughts on the initial survey of this list. I have no objection to it as an opening for discussion, but not a commitment of any kind.
Commissioner McGriff?
I would concur with Commissioner O'Donnell. I think it's a great start. I'm happy to see down the bathrooms on there and the one right under that, but I wanted to throw out to my fellow commissioners a couple of suggestions. I believe that we need to have some funds allocated for the elevator, security gate, and putting in security cameras and stuff there. We have had, as you know, we've had a couple of incidences where the gates were completely busted. And, if there are people who are trying to manipulate those who are not able-bodied, you can't do it. And we need security cameras there really bad. And it's a major transportation facility, obviously, because it's 7th Street going up and down. So that's one. And then A possible consideration under pedestrian improvements is, as of late, I've been using 10th and Main quite a bit. And I don't know if the drivers there are visually impaired in some way, but almost got hit 2 days ago, trying to cross from the Portion Estate Bank side to the Renee's side. I just don't know if they're not seeing the stop sign, but you know, we need something to come down and like, okay, this is a pedestrian area, and that people are going back and forth a lot there, as I'm sure you're aware, to the, you know, the parking lots and then back to downtown. I'm glad to see the citywide essential employee pay on there. I don't think that that's, for me, just my opinion is I don't think that's enough money. We've got primary, you've got citywide, but I'm looking at 2, you know, public works staff and the police department, which they don't have really, some of those folks have no opportunity to work from home, so they're out there. I'd like to see some more funds in that. And the other thing that I liked what Tony said about the security improvements for some city facilities, and that probably will hit 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of some other security things that we can do. You know, transportation is pretty general. Again, I pulled out the elevator just because of how much it's used, and that needs to be secured there. So that's all I have for just right now. I'm just kind of looking. I've looked down the list and made some notes as well, but it's a good starting off point.
All right. I don't mind asking, I have a couple of questions. So the water infrastructure of the 5.6 million, do we have a targeted list of projects for that 5.6? I mean, we just went to the ballot for a much, much larger number. So I think one question that's going to come up is, why aren't you spending the whole 8.6? I know. So I'm just wondering, how did we come up with the 5.6?
How did we come up with that? So that was in the original budget that we adopted. And as we started to break down at that time, we had the 4 buckets we had to work with and justify. And we had the undesignated because we weren't sure how those rules were going to play out. But we knew that we could spend some of that money, we could justify and demonstrate for transportation revenue loss, tourism revenue loss. Broadband was a specific project, and then water infrastructure was a specific project. And so the discussion was, you know, could we put a significant amount of this money towards that water infrastructure? We're going to be coming back, I believe within the next month. So after so we had the approval of the ability to take on the debt for water infrastructure, and we had the rate fail. And so Matt and John and their teams have been working on, we're still trying to look at, because we have that bonding authority, that WIFIA program is very advantageous for public sector to use. So incorporating that 5.6 million, because there's a 50% match on that WIFIA loan, which is approximately $12 million that the city would have to come up with. So I guess John can speak to, during the budgeting process specifically, you know, how we were going to spend those funds. But, you know, as circumstances have changed, we know a little bit more now, both the program and where we stand with the votes of what we can do. So our plan is to bring that back once we've been able to look at the numbers to see if that WIFIA program, with the 5.6 that we've budgeted, capital that we have in reserve, and then our existing revenue streams, you know, could we still qualify? But as for a specific breakdown, I'm pretty sure we probably had projects for those funds.
Okay. So is it possible that 5.6 will need to change based on the WIFIA conversation? It may need to go up, or is it still flexible?
Right now, we're working within
that number.
What we know. Yeah, what was approved. Yeah.
Okay.
On February 8th, more specifically to what Tony was referring to, is when we'll come back, we're scheduled to come back in work session and talk about specifically the water projects. And so, yes, that the amount of 5.6 was the original, but it could flex. And we are like literally this week and next week, working through our analysis on our own funding availability to come up with match money for WIFIA. And to answer your question further about specific projects with WIFIA, Patty and John's team, they did go through the initial step to reach out to WIFIA and, be invited to apply. And there were specific projects that had to be identified that would qualify for the WIFIA program. So there is a finite list. I don't have that here in my head, but there is a finite list of projects that would be eligible for WIFIA.
Okay. So, I guess I can just run through the list like Commissioner McGriff did. I guess before I do that, I have a question. So the Cayuse 5 tribute, you said this 100,000 is on top of the 150 that we have already committed in our goals?
Correct.
Okay. I think that's more than I would support for a memorial. I thought we thought as a commission that 150,000 was very generous. And that we were just waiting on the design. So this reminds me of Commissioner O'Donnell's conversation about the Public Works facility. I think there's a balance here. Like, we didn't want the Taj Mahal, but we wanted something reasonable. I think we have quite a number of members in our community who might have a little heartburn of us spending $250,000. I'm willing to spend money, but I don't know that I can get there, because I thought 150 was a lot. And I thought we expected the tribe to also come to the table with us, that this was a joint effort, and I'm not sure if that's happening either. So the Father's Heart relocation, I know the city wants to contribute 500,000, seems a little much to me. I could pull that number back, because I see we're over by 2 million. So I'm looking for areas in which we could cut things or make tweaks. I think we could cut back just a little on that. I think 400,000, for example, would be fine. I'm probably going to get a lot of hate emails for this, but I don't really support the essential employee pay for the police department regarding the letter that was provided, or for our staff. If I need to expand on that, I can. I know the letter said the state did it and the county did it, and I didn't agree when they did it either. So I believe we pay our workers, and I believe we pay them well. COVID has challenged all of us. I think we've all been asked to do things above and beyond. We ask our public works folks to work in inclement weather all the time. It's part of their job duties. So I feel like this is a snowball. It's one that it's a slippery slope that we need to be really careful on. So just in general, I wouldn't support that. What else we have on there? There was another one. I'm not sure why the library reconfiguration is separate from other COVID city operations. So maybe I have a question on that, but
I think Greg was on the line.
Go. I think it's your interaction, Rachel, with the public.
Hey, Greg, can you hear us?
Yep.
Want to maybe talk a little bit about library post-COVID reconfiguration, your thoughts there?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I'll defer to Matt as to the categorization on how that all happened. Some of the projects, as we've been moving through the COVID pandemic, for last budget year, we our fine revenue was way down. We eliminated overdue fines to help mitigate some of the impacts of the pandemic. That was about $40,000. As we've been coming back and doing some reconfiguration of the space to make sure that it's a safe space, that hopefully if this happens again in the future, we don't have to resort to such drastic measures. We've encountered some challenges. For example, reconfiguring spaces in the library, we now have different camera placement needs. So we have different traffic patterns going through the library. So we need to be able to have some cameras to be able to provide a secure environment. We made some changes to the kids area to make that a little safer. We have some additional amenities we would like to put in there to make it a more, we had to take some things away. We're trying to put back some more amenities and attractions for the kids in the community, but do that in a more safe way. We have had to do some changes to the way we're envisioning meeting rooms going forward. We've had to do some staff reconfigurations and repurpose some of our space. So especially for our upstairs meeting room, we have some ideas about how we could modify that to make that a more flexible space and kind of restore some of the capacity that we lost due to post-COVID reconfigurations. We've got some furniture needs. Some of these we've already accrued some expenses for, and we were, hoping to, since those were COVID-related expenses, we were hoping to allocate some of this revenue, this COVID-related relief revenue, towards those expenses. So those are kind of things that we're looking at. It's much more of we want to make sure that we have a facility that is can be a little more responsive going forward if we ever have to get in this position again. And in order to do that, there's just some furniture configuration and other apparatus costs that's included in that $75,000 figure.
Okay, so I think I got most of that, but that sounded like it was more reimbursement than it was needing funds. Like we've already expended.
Some of it we've spent the money already, and some of it we have not yet. So, for example, the meeting room reconfiguration that we're looking at upstairs, that is not. We don't have that in our current budget. So that would have to be something we'd have to identify some new revenue for.
Greg, you're going to have to speak up and slower if you want us to understand what you're saying.
Sorry, my apologies. For example, the meeting room reconfiguration that we're looking at upstairs, that is something that has not been undertaken. That is something that we do not have currently in our budget. So that would be an example of something we're looking for. We were thinking this might be a potential revenue source to support that rather than getting reimbursed for work that's already been done.
Okay. So I guess the last thing I'll say, and then I'll go to Commissioner O'Donnell. It sounds like we have some items that, if we're thinking of this timeline, that staff are thinking we could use these dollars. Like right now, we have plans for these, or at least this biennium, and then we have these aspirational, visional, long-term stuff that don't have times on them. So I think when this comes back to us, it would be really good to start pinning those things down, because I think you're essentially going to come back to us and say, do you approve us moving forward with A, B, and C? And without us starting to see that come together on your spreadsheet, I think we want to feel good about our decisions. I think that would be one of the next steps. Because clearly, Greg has some specific line items. We've talked about the restroom. So there may be several things that we are confident we want to move forward with, but we need to understand what we're separating out. And I'll stop there. I do like the elevator security idea, though. That's a good one. Commissioner O'Donnell.
Yeah, I'll chime in on a number of points. Our city manager mentioned a prospective end date. It would be good to know when that is, that we have to utilize those funds by that date. So as that becomes a firmer piece of information, that'll be critical.
Can I interrupt real quick?
You do know it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was, we have to have the funds under contract by December 31st of 2024. And we have to have them.
We have a year? We have essentially a year?
We have almost 3 years.
Okay.
Just shy of 3 years.
So we've got time to make critical decisions.
December 31st of 24 and 26 are the 2 dates.
Okay. As far as the library director's comments, which I had a hard time hearing them. I'm a follower of the library. I was a major user of it. I've used it with my grandchildren. I think that our library director has accomplished a lot within his existing budget. If he wants to move forward with other things and they're COVID related, I, as a commissioner, are going to want to see line item. Well, specifically, what is it you want to do that's related to this fund, to this COVID, that you haven't done? But I think you've done a commendable job of keeping operations going. But I'm going to watch the purse strings. And when you come before this commission for something, be prepared to justify it. if you look at that statement of funds that was published, there's $2.5 million of unallocated funding in there, if you read it, whether it be unallocated or whatever the terminology is. I also agree with the mayor. This additional compensation for critical employees. I struggle with that because what is it that they need as a result of this COVID that others don't need? How do they differ, whether it be from anyone who interacts with the public, whether it be library workers or teachers or community college instructors or daycare workers or senior care workers or the people at the grocery that have had to keep it going, or the delivery people that are salespeople who have to make in-person calls and go to major trade shows with thousands of people. What support is it that's specific other than just additional compensation? I don't like just throwing money at a nebulous cause. If somebody can identify what that need is, that's fine. But there's part of me that feels like everybody wants to put the grab on some of this money for their operations. Come forward and justify it and tell us what it is. Don't just say, I need money. So I don't agree with what the county did. I just don't do it. I see these people manning the front lines at Winco and grocery stores, and they're getting compensated, and I don't see that the teachers getting compensated anymore for the additional burden they're taking on. So I'm not going to differentiate protective services from anything else at this point. You have to show me what it is that differentiates you from anyone else. Other than that, when I look at police officers or nurses, it's hazardous duty by definition. So how does this, are you telling me you need additional babysitting services? Let's talk about that before we jump into the fray. I do agree with something Commissioner McGriff said. I like security for that. And not only for that, I bet our vandalism losses in this city are significant. I mean, I see them at my own park where public services like the bathrooms are literally destroyed. If we want to look at, and that's a health issue. If you go there and the bathroom doesn't work, that's a health issue. So do we need to put cameras and monitor? Do we need to start, if we can identify and prosecute those who destroy critical services, maybe that's a valid expenditure. So I agree with what you said about the library. I'd probably expand it to some of our restrooms, even in our parks. So those are my thoughts overall. And I yield the floor to anyone else who wants to participate.
Are you okay about the elevator?
Certainly.
You said library, but I think you meant elevator.
I meant, yeah.
Elevator, yeah. Yep.
I figure if this is coming back to us, we don't need to go through every line item and talk about it. We're going to be doing that again.
Right.
So
Only
I
if you have any
agree. I agree with, no, and I'm not putting anyone down for sharing their thoughts on each of these line items. I feel the same about a lot of the comments that have been made. There's some other things that I'd like to have more of a conversation about. So I think, if this can come back to us and we can kind of go through it. And I would like to, hear from staff more directly, because there's some of these things that with that more input, we might say, oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense, and we have the time to go through it. So.
Yep.
Tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it would be great to have a regular length work session dedicated specifically to this, but I wanted to wait because I figured I wouldn't be the only downer here. And so I'm heartened to know that I'm not the only one, specifically for me as it relates to the Father's Heart relocation. I was not aware that we were actually going to be investing money into that. I thought it was more of a time, manpower sort of thing. So I would like to hear more about that. And then also the Cayuse 5 tribute, I agree. That's all I'll say on that matter. So I think we just need some more details here, but I think we all appreciate that this is a very high level view of what we're hoping to accomplish. So there is much work to be done.
So, Mr. Conkle, are you getting what you want from us in this discussion, or was this just for us to kind of have a discussion and see kind of where we're at, or do you need more information from us?
I guess, I was, hoping that there would be, are there things that we're not interested in? Are there other things, I guess, what would you expect to come back at? I just don't want to bring you this list again. Or do you just want to think about it for a while and we bring back the exact same list and, we're able to then build from there?
I think there's specifics that we need to elucidate us on. For example, the Cayuse 5 Memorial. I've been in those discussions with the tribes. The very things we discussed were, what is it you want? Give us some kind of drawing, a sketch. Define what you want in the way of a monument. Do you want 5-foot high pillars? Do you want 20-foot high pillars? What footprint do you need? We're throwing money at this, and we have part of their obligation. And I'll say that to the tribes if they call me or to anyone else. They have a role in this. This is their memorial to their peoples. What is it specifically you want? And to my knowledge, unless you've got that information, it's not yet been defined. We don't know the footprint. We don't know the characteristics of it. We don't know the materials. So we're throwing huge chunks of money around that we don't even know what the project is. And they have a role in this. And I'll say that to them directly. You have a role in this. This is in honor of your people in a historical event that needs to be recognized. So participate.
No. I guess it seems like I think we'll mull all this over and you can bring it back. I think what would be helpful would be some type of, maybe more of a narrative with each one of these, or telling us, splitting out things that have tangible items that are kind of ready to move forward versus things that are, well, we don't really have things scoped, and so therefore we're putting, this is truly a placeholder for something, a year or two down the road. Because I feel like right now it's all mixed together. Whereas clearly Greg with the library had some very specific ideas. Some of these are pretty specific. It's just a little all blended together. I don't know that we need more on the Clackment Park boat ramp. For example, I think we all know what that one is, the $250,000. But I don't know, like with the homelessness one, I think with a little more time, I think we could talk about, I know Chief Ban and I have talked about that one, and we could put a little bit more narrative on what's realistic. And I think we do want to contribute. We haven't gotten quite enough to sharpen our pencils. It is truly just a placeholder, but I think we should probably sharpen our pencils a little bit and see if 500,000 is just a lot of money. So.
Yeah, and I guess, some of these were based off of, like, for example, the CD building, I think was about $1.2 million, and that didn't include purchasing it. So, when we're talking about trying to partner to relocate Father's Heart, you've got buying a new building, tenant improvements, land use, and is there a way to make that investment and hopefully partner? Say we're in, we're willing to work here, county, state, whoever. Right. So some of these are just placeholders.
So I think another month on that, we'll probably have much better information on that one of a proposal of our contribution. Matt, were you going to say something? No. Okay. Is there anything else? Commissioner McGriff?
Since there was I'll say it politely, not supportive of anything to do with the employees on this list, I think it would be helpful to get some more detailed information if we can from, I'm presuming it's probably from AFSCME and the Oregon City Police Employees Association. Again, as I said earlier, I support that. I don't think that's enough money, but I'm willing to suggest that we have further conversations, as we should, about it. And if you want more specifics, I think that's only fair. So that's all I wanted to add.
Is this an item that needs some consensus on tonight?
No.
Okay.
No, I think, from my standpoint, and we'll try to flush this out a little bit more. The original bucket identified essential employees, but essentially for over a year and a half now, we've asked our staff to keep these facilities running. You're right. Do other facilities, other businesses, private side, nurses, school, do they have to deal with this? Yes, they do. But we do have an opportunity here to potentially, is it a specifically essential pay, or is it a merit? Is it we've asked staff to be here every day. There's lots of places that aren't open. And we've kept these facilities running. We've put together a good program to try to keep our employees safe. We've been focused on, if you don't feel good, do not come, because we are asking everybody to be here. So, it's a give and a take. But, at the same time, yes, I agree. Every business has had to deal with this. But I think our staff have done a really stand-up job of keeping these facilities running. There are others that aren't open on the public side. And, a lot of private side keep putting off having their employees come to work. And we did not do that. We got back in here pretty quick and been able to keep it running for since this all started, but in person for over a year and a half. So some of this is looking back to when this all started. It was kind of the Wild West. We were wiping down things after every meeting, every time a person came in. We've definitely learned more over the last year and a half. So we can bring back more information on that, but I do understand. I hear you loud and clear on that as well.
Can I add one? I feel like I should maybe just say one thing on behalf of the employees, because I've communicated about this with them, and you're right, Commissioner O'Donnell, that everybody in the communities had to go to work and interact. The one thing that I would say that's different is everybody says social distance, keep a mask on, keep your space. Yeah. We've got officers who are going into domestics of all sort of varieties. You're not wearing a mask going into a hot family who's arguing, physically fighting, and wearing masks to try and communicate with people who they're having to force into handcuffs. They've done CPR on people. So I hear what you're saying, but from the employee perspective, who's having to ignore every rule that everybody else is trying their best to go under. And I think some of the additional pressure comes then when they go home. So there's these exposures, then they go get out of the uniform, and they go home to their wife and kids, husband and kids, whatever. So there's some nuance to it. That's all.
All right. And I think with that, we are done with this discussion, and we'll be back at 7 for our regular meeting. We're adjourned.
Thank you.